In a Sunbaked Village, 17-year-old Asha lived with her ailing mother and curious little brother Raju. Their home was a single room, their lives marked by absence, her father gone to the city, never to return. Each morning Asha swept the floor, cared for Amma and sent Raju to school before heading to the pottery shed. Her hands, shaped by work, found solace in clay under the guidance of old Babuji, the village potter. Despite hardship, Asha's eyes held dreams that reached beyond the dusty fields. She carried hope quietly, her spirit unbroken by the weight of daily struggle. In the pottery shed, Asha's story truly began. Babuji, the potter, was more than a mentor. He was a keeper of tradition and a quiet source of strength. Under his watchful eye, Asha's hands shaped clay into beauty, her skill growing with every piece. Payment was meager. Rice, a coin, sometimes just gratitude. But Asha never complained. Her earnings went to Amma's medicine and food for Raju, her resolve unwavering. The monsoon was late, crops withering, and worry grew in every home. At night, Asha listened to her mother's cough, the sound a constant reminder of her family's fragility. Yet she clung to honesty and hard work, believing they would one day lead her to something better. The drought pressed in, but Asha's spirit did not yield. Amma's medicine was nearly gone, and the clinic offered little hope. The real treatment was in town, too far, too costly. Every coin Asha earned became precious, her days stretching longer as she worked before dawn and after dusk. She sold pottery door to door, helped neighbors for scraps of food, and bore the ache of exhaustion in silence. Raju noticed her fatigue and tried to help, folding laundry and washing plates. Amma, confined to her cot, watched with pride and sorrow, wishing Asha could chase her own dreams. Asha only smiled, refusing to let worry show. The drought threatened everything, but Asha's love for her family kept her moving. She would not let despair win. One sweltering afternoon, excitement filled the pottery shed. Babuji had received a large order from a wealthy town family. 10 ornate ceremonial pots for a wedding could mean enough money for medicine and food. Babuji, too old for the journey, looked to Asha. Without hesitation, she volunteered to deliver the pots herself, despite her fears of the unknown town. Together, they worked tirelessly, crafting each pot with care and hope. When the pots were ready, Asha wrapped them carefully, preparing for the journey. Babuji's faith in her was absolute. With a final nod, Asha set off, carrying not just pottery, but her family's fragile hope. The road ahead was uncertain, but Asha's resolve was clear. She would do whatever it took. The journey to town was long and harsh, the bus ride jostling Asha and her precious cargo. The town's chaos overwhelmed her, but she pressed on, asking for directions until she reached Mrs. Day's grand home. Mrs. Day inspected the pots in silence, then paid Asha just enough, no extra, no praise. Disappointed but determined, Asha turned to leave. Then she spotted a velvet pouch on the steps. Inside, gold bangles and a roll of crisp notes, more wealth than she'd ever imagined. Her hands trembled as she realized the choice before her. In that moment, Asha's honesty and spirit would be tested as never before. The future of her family and her own heart hung in the balance. What would she do next? Her hands trembled as she held the small velvet pouch, its weight feeling impossibly heavy. A burden of both immense value and profound consequence. Inside, the gold bangles gleamed with a soft, warm light, catching the afternoon sun and casting tiny, dancing reflections. The crisp banknotes were neatly folded, their very texture speaking of a world of wealth and ease that was entirely foreign to her. For a long, heart-stopping moment, Asha simply stood frozen on the stone steps, the noisy street fading into a distant hum. The world seemed to narrow to just her and the life-altering contents of this pouch. Her mind, usually so clear and focused, became a dizzying whirlwind of thoughts and possibilities, each one more tempting than the last. The sheer amount of money was staggering, a fortune that could rewrite her family's entire story. With this money, the constant, gnawing worry that had been her companion for so long could simply vanish. She could walk into the town clinic not as a desperate girl begging for credit, but as someone who could afford the very best care for Amma. She envisioned her mother free from the rattling cough, her breath coming easy and steady, a healthy color returning to her cheeks. She pictured Raju not in his worn-out hand-me-downs, but in a crisp new uniform, attending a better school where his bright, curious mind could truly flourish. The money could secure their future, providing a buffer against the droughts, the failed crops, and the cruel uncertainties of life. It was a key, a golden key that could unlock a door to a life she had only ever dared to dream about. No one had seen her. She glanced around quickly, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The street was busy, but people were wrapped up in their own worlds, hurrying along without a second glance at the girl from the village. The servant had gone back inside, the heavy door closing with a definitive thud. Mrs. Day was somewhere within her grand house, completely unaware of the treasure she had lost. It would be so easy, so incredibly simple, to just slip the pouch into her own satchel, turn around and walk away. Who would ever know? It felt like a test, a cruel and tempting offering from the universe placed directly in her path at her moment of greatest need. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, caught in the powerful cross-current of warring voices inside her head. One voice was that of desperation, whispering of the endless hunger, the bone-deep exhaustion, and the deep, painful ache of wanting something better for her loved ones. It reminded her of Amma's suffering and Raju's limited future. It argued that this wasn't stealing, it was survival, a gift from fate. This voice was loud, persuasive, and fed by every hardship she had ever endured. It painted a vivid picture of relief and security, a future free from the constant struggle that defined her present. The temptation was immense, a physical force that made it hard to breathe, pulling her towards the path of ease and silence. But then, cutting through the clamor of desperation, another voice emerged. It was quieter, gentler, but it held a strength that the other voice lacked. It was the voice of her mother, Amma, speaking words that had been woven into the very fabric of Asha's being. Even if no one sees you do the right thing, God does. The memory was so clear, so vivid. It was as if Amma was standing right beside her, her hand resting gently on Asha's shoulder. It was a simple belief, a cornerstone of her upbringing, a moral compass that had guided her through every small decision in her life. It was the principle that made her work harder instead of complaining, that made her treat others with kindness, even when she received none in return. It was the core of who she was. This single thought was enough to steady her trembling hands. The feverish haze of temptation began to recede, replaced by a quiet, resolute clarity. The gold bangles suddenly seemed less like a promise of freedom and more like a heavy chain. The crisp banknotes felt like they could burn her fingers. This was not her money. It did not belong to her. To keep it would be to betray everything she believed in, to tarnish the one thing she truly owned, her integrity. What good would a healthy mother be if Asha had to look at her every day with the eyes of a thief? How could she teach Raju the value of honesty if she herself had abandoned it for personal gain? The choice became starkly, painfully clear. The struggle within her, though brief, felt monumental. It was a battle fought not on a grand stage, but silently on the stone steps of a stranger's house. It was a fight between the crushing weight of her circumstances and the unwavering strength of her character. With a deep, cleansing breath, Asha made her choice. The frantic pounding of her heart slowed to a steady, determined beat. A sense of calm settled over her. The right path was rarely the easy one, but it was the only one she could walk. With newfound resolve firming her spine, she turned back towards the imposing gate, the velvet pouch held firmly and purposefully in her hand. The decision was made not out of fear of being caught, but out of a deep and abiding commitment to her own values. She knocked on the gate, the sound sharper and more confident than her timid inquiries from before. After a moment, the same servant who had dismissed her earlier opened it, his expression a mixture of surprise and annoyance at seeing her again. He looked down at the pouch in her hand, his eyes widening slightly. He did not need to ask any questions. Asha simply extended her hand, her gaze direct and unwavering. "I found this outside your door," she said, her voice quiet but clear, carrying no trace of the internal turmoil she had just overcome. She simply stated the fact, offering no embellishment or expectation. The servant took the pouch from her without a word, his professional impassivity returning as he gave a curt nod and disappeared back inside, leaving Asha once again alone at the gate. Asha waited, not because she expected a reward, but because it just felt right to see the matter to its conclusion. A few long minutes passed, each one stretching out as the sounds of the city slowly returned to her awareness. Finally, the main door of the house opened again. This time it was Mrs. Day herself who appeared, holding the velvet pouch in her hand. Her expression was as unreadable as before, her posture regal and her eyes sharp as they fixed on Asha. She walked down the stone steps slowly, her silk sari rustling with each deliberate movement. She stopped directly in front of Asha, creating an invisible but palpable divide between their two worlds, the world of immense wealth and the world of profound poverty. "You returned this?" Mrs. Day asked, her tone flat, betraying no emotion. It was not a question of gratitude, but one of verification, almost of disbelief. She held up the pouch slightly, as if to confirm they were speaking of the same object. Asha simply nodded, her eyes lowered respectfully, but her stance firm. "Yes, madam," she replied, her voice steady. There was no tremor of fear or hint of regret in her words. She had made her choice, and she stood by it. The simple honesty of her response seemed to hang in the air between them, a stark and unadorned truth. Mrs. Day's eyes narrowed, scrutinizing Asha's face, as if searching for a flicker of deceit or a hidden motive. "Do you have any idea what this is worth?" she pressed, her voice taking on a sharper edge. Asha met her gaze for a brief moment, her own eyes clear and direct, reflecting nothing but sincerity. "Yes, madam," she answered softly, but without hesitation. "I do." It was a quiet acknowledgement that she understood the magnitude of the fortune she'd held in her hands, and the magnitude of the temptation she had overcome. "And you didn't think even for a moment of keeping it?" Mrs. Day's final question was laced with a deep ingrained cynicism. Asha looked up, her gaze meeting the older woman's without flinching. "No, madam," she said, "it was not mine." A long, heavy silence followed. Mrs. Day's hard expression did not soften, but something shifted in her eyes. Then, without another word, she turned and walked back into her grand house. Asha felt a small, sharp sting of disappointment. A part of her had hoped for a kind word, a simple thank you. But as she turned and walked toward the bus, her stomach empty and her arms aching, she felt immeasurably light. She had done the right thing. 2 days passed, slow and heavy with the familiar weight of hardship. Asha returned to the village, the memory of the velvet pouch and the crisp banknotes already feeling like a strange, distant dream. She slipped back into her routine at the pottery shed, her fingers finding comfort in the cool, yielding clay. She was shaping a small, delicate lamp, her movements fluid and focused, when a man appeared at the entrance of the shed. He was a stranger, his clothes dusty from a long journey, and he was breathing heavily as if he had been running. He scanned the humble workshop before his eyes settled on Asha. Babuji, who had been quietly watching Asha work with a look of gentle pride, straightened up, his brow furrowed with curiosity and a touch of concern. "Are you the girl named Asha?" the messenger asked, his voice still catching in his throat. His question hung in the quiet, clay-scented air, startling Asha from her concentration. She looked up, wiping her clay-caked hands on the sides of her simple kurta, a small act of habit before addressing a stranger. "Yes," she confirmed, her voice soft but clear. "I am Asha." The man seemed to relax slightly, having found his destination. He took another breath before delivering his message, a message that would irrevocably alter the course of Asha's life. "Madam Day from the town has sent for you," he announced. "She says you are to bring your things. You have a job." Asha simply blinked, the words taking a moment to register. They made no sense. A job? What kind of job? She had delivered the pots, returned the pouch, and that was the end of it. She was a potter from a poor village. What possible use could a wealthy woman like Mrs. Day have for her? "A job?" she repeated, confusion clouding her features. "But I don't understand." The messenger simply shrugged, as if he were merely a vessel for information and not privy to the reasons behind it. "She said she will explain everything when you arrive," he stated plainly, his duty now fulfilled. The news was so unexpected, so far outside the realm of possibility, that Asha could only stand there, speechless and bewildered. Babuji, ever protective of Asha, stepped forward, his expression wary. He placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, his gaze fixed on the messenger. "What kind of job is this?" he asked, his voice firm and questioning. He would not let his prized student be taken advantage of or led into an uncertain situation. The messenger, however, had little more to offer. "I do not know the details," he admitted with another shrug. "Some kind of housework, I think. An assistant, perhaps. I was told it offers good pay." He then added the most crucial piece of information, the words that Mrs. Day had spoken. She said the girl is honest. A very rare quality, she said. Babuji's gaze shifted from the messenger to Asha, and the tension in his face softened into understanding. He gave her a slow, deliberate nod. "Go, my child," he said, his voice filled with affection. "A door is open for you. Following Babuji's counsel, Asha moved with a sense of dreamlike purpose. She went home and packed a small, simple cloth bundle. It contained her few worldly possessions, a change of clothes, the precious list of Amma's medicines and Raju's school papers, which she always kept safe. Her preparations were quick, her movements efficient, but her mind was racing with 1,000 questions and a fluttering mixture of hope and fear. Before leaving, she returned to the pottery shed to say a proper goodbye to her mentor. She hugged Babuji tightly, burying her face for a moment in the familiar earthy scent of his tunic. He was more than a teacher, he was the closest thing she had to a father. "I will come back to help in the evenings whenever I can," she promised, her voice thick with emotion. He simply patted her back, his old eyes shining with unshed tears of pride. The journey back to the town was vastly different from her first trip. This time she wasn't balancing a heavy, fragile load, but carrying a light bundle filled with the possibility of a new life. The Day household, which had seemed so imposing and intimidating just days before, now appeared as a gateway to opportunity. Mrs. Day greeted her at the door personally. Her expression remained neutral, her posture as regal as ever, but Asha thought she detected a new softness in her sharp eyes. There was no servant acting as an intermediary this time, it was a direct encounter, a clear sign that Asha's status had already changed. The grand home was not just a place of wealth, Asha now noticed, but also one of quiet, meticulous order, filled with beautiful art and books. Mrs. Day wasted no time on pleasantries, getting straight to the heart of the matter. "You returned something valuable to me," she began, her voice even and direct. "You could have kept it. You had every reason to. Why didn't you?" It was the same question she had asked before, but this time it felt less like an accusation and more like a genuine inquiry. A desire to understand the character of the young woman standing before her. Asha's answer remained the same, rooted in the simple, unshakable truth of her principles. "It was not mine to keep, madam," she replied quietly, her gaze steady. It was the only explanation necessary, the only one she had. Mrs. Day studied her for a long, silent moment, her sharp gaze seeming to peer directly into Asha's soul. Finally, she gave a single, decisive nod, as if a final piece of a puzzle had clicked into place. "I need someone like you in this house," she stated. "I've grown tired of dishonesty and excuses. I need help with errands, organizing my accounts, and dealing with my clients. You will have a room here, and I will pay you a weekly salary." As she named the amount, Asha's heart began to race. It was more money than she could have earned in half a year at the pottery shed. It was a sum that could truly change everything for her family, lifting them out of the suffocating grip of poverty and uncertainty. Just as Asha was trying to absorb the shock of the generous salary, Mrs. Day added something else, a casual remark that held the weight of a miracle. "I will also arrange for my driver to take your mother to the city clinic for her checkups once a week," she said, as if it were a minor detail. "I have already spoken to a doctor there and made the necessary arrangements." At these words, the dam of composure that Asha had so carefully maintained finally broke. Tears sprang to her eyes, hot and sudden. They were not tears of sadness or fear, but of overwhelming, unbelievable gratitude. She quickly looked down, embarrassed by her display of emotion, and hastily wiped the tears away with the back of her hand. Struggling to find her voice, she managed to whisper, "Thank you, madam. Thank you. I will work very hard for you, I promise." Her voice was choked with emotion, but her sincerity was unmistakable. Mrs. Day's stern facade seemed to soften for just a fraction of a second. A flicker of something akin to warmth crossed her features before she composed herself again. "I know you will," she said simply, her tone conveying a deep and certain confidence in Asha's character. In that moment, Asha understood that this job was not an act of charity, it was a reward, an opportunity she had earned through a single powerful act of integrity. Her honesty had become her most valuable asset. In the days that followed, Asha threw herself into her new role with quiet, fierce dedication. The grand house was a new world, but she was a quick and observant learner. She organized ledgers with meticulous care, her handwriting neat and precise. She delivered important items for Mrs. Day, navigating the bustling town with growing confidence. She managed deliveries and appointments with such quiet competence and unwavering honesty that she quickly earned the respect of the entire household staff. Even the long-faced, perpetually stern butler, who had initially eyed her with suspicion, began to give her small, approving nods as she passed. Her innate qualities set her apart from everyone else. Her humility was not a sign of weakness, but of a deep self-awareness. Her curiosity drove her to ask questions, to understand the why behind her tasks, not just the how. She learned quickly, absorbing information and mastering new responsibilities with an ease that surprised everyone, including Mrs. Day. Most importantly, she never once took advantage of the trust or generosity she had been shown. In the evenings, when her duties allowed, she would still visit the pottery shed, her fingers longing for the familiar grounding feel of the clay. On her days off, she would ensure Amma took her medicine and would sit with Raju, helping him with the homework from his new, better school. And sometimes from the veranda, she would catch Mrs. Day watching her, a faint, thoughtful smile on her lips. Just when Asha felt a sense of stability and peace settle over her life, a new kind of trouble arrived at the Day household. It did not come creeping in like poverty or illness, but strode in confidently, draped in expensive silk and trailing a cloud of strong, sweet perfume. This trouble had a name, Rena. She was Mrs. Day's niece, visiting from the bustling city for the duration of the school holidays. Rena was the very antithesis of Asha. Where Asha was quiet and humble, Rena was loud and demanding. Where Asha was grateful for every small opportunity, Rena was entitled, accustomed to having her every whim catered to without question. From the very first moment her eyes fell upon Asha, Rena's nose wrinkled in disdain, sizing her up with a cold, dismissive glance. "She works here?" Rena asked her aunt loudly, making no effort to lower her voice, though Asha was standing just a few feet away, arranging flowers in a vase. "Auntie, really? She looks like she belongs in the servant quarters, not in the main house." The words were sharp and intended to wound, a casual cruelty born of arrogance. Asha felt a hot flush of embarrassment creep up her neck, but she kept her head bowed, her focus intent on the flowers in her hands. She refused to look up or offer any reaction. Over the past weeks, she had learned a valuable lesson in this house of quiet dignity. Silence often possessed a power and grace that angry words could never match. It was a shield against the small-mindedness of others. However, Rena was not one to be deterred by silence. She seemed to view Asha's quiet presence as a personal affront, a challenge to her own importance in the household. The niece's resentment simmered for days, manifesting in petty complaints and constant condescending remarks. She would purposefully leave messes for Asha to clean, or issue contradictory orders designed to confuse and frustrate her. Asha bore it all with a patient and stoic grace, continuing her work diligently and avoiding Rena whenever possible. She understood that Rena's behavior was not truly about her. It was a reflection of Rena's own insecurities and character, a stark contrast to the values Asha held dear. Asha focused on her duties, on Ammar's improving health, and on Raju's happy reports from his new school. The simmering tension finally boiled over one afternoon. Rena stormed into the main living room, her face a mask of theatrical distress. She was clutching a beautiful but empty velvet jewelry box, holding it up for all to see. "Someone has stolen my grandmother's ruby necklace," she cried out, her voice filled with a dramatic, trembling panic that commanded immediate attention. "It was right here in my drawer this morning, safe in its box, and now it's gone." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and poisonous, instantly shattering the calm and orderly atmosphere of the house. The quiet hum of the household came to an abrupt and fearful halt. The staff gathered, their faces etched with worry, a collective sense of dread descending upon them all. A palpable tension immediately gripped the household. The air, usually so calm and orderly, became thick with suspicion and fear. The servants, who had worked for Mrs. Day for years, were lined up in the grand hall, their faces a mixture of anxiety and indignation. Their personal bags were unceremoniously searched, a humiliating process that eroded the years of trust built within these walls. Asha stood amongst them, her heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm of disbelief. And then Rena's sharp, accusing eyes fell directly on her. With a flair for the dramatic, Rena raised a trembling finger and pointed it squarely at Asha, her voice ringing with false certainty. "It must be her! She's the new one here! She goes into all the rooms to clean and run errands. I saw her near my bedroom drawer just yesterday." Asha stood frozen, the accusation hitting her with the force of a physical blow. She felt the blood drain from her face, the stares of the other staff members burning into her. Shock rendered her momentarily speechless. How could this be happening? She had worked so hard to prove herself, to build a reputation based on honesty and diligence. To be accused of being a thief, the very thing she had fought so hard against becoming, was a deep and painful wound. I have never taken anything in my life, she finally managed to say, her voice trembling slightly but laced with a desperate sincerity. I didn't even know there was a ruby necklace. I would never do such a thing. Just then, Mrs. Day entered the room, her presence immediately commanding silence. She was, as always, composed and unreadable, her gaze sweeping over the tense scene before her. She looked at her distraught niece, at the nervous staff, and finally her eyes came to rest on Asha. She walked slowly towards her, her steps measured and deliberate. "Asha," she said, her voice soft but carrying a weight that cut through the tension in the room. "Is there anything you wish to tell me?" The question was open-ended, a final opportunity for a confession. Asha looked directly into her employer's eyes, the same eyes that had once seen her goodness, the same eyes that had offered her this new life. She had to believe that that same perception, that same wisdom was still there. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Asha found her calm. The tremor left her voice, replaced by a quiet strength. "No, madam," she said, her gaze unwavering. "I have taken nothing. I have nothing to confess because I have done nothing wrong." She paused, the weight of her next words settling heavily in her heart. "If you want me to leave, I will understand. I will pack my things and go. But I will not lie and admit to something I did not do, just to stay here." Rena scoffed loudly at this declaration. "She's a liar, a common thief. She should be turned over to the police immediately." But Mrs. Day, with a single sharp gesture, raised her hand for silence. "Enough," she commanded, her voice like steel. Her decision was swift and absolute. Swift and... Mrs. Day turned away from the emotional theatrics of her niece and addressed her personal assistant, a quiet man who had been observing the scene from the doorway. "Please check the security footage from the upstairs hallway for the past 24 hours, she instructed, her tone leaving no room for argument or discussion. At the mention of security cameras, Rena's face went visibly pale. The dramatic color drained from her cheeks, replaced by a chalky white shade of panic. You have cameras in the house?" she stammered, her voice suddenly small and uncertain. The confident accuser was gone, replaced by a cornered, frightened girl. "Yes," Mrs. Day replied, her gaze now fixed on her niece, her voice as cold and hard as ice. "I do." The 20 minutes that followed were the longest of Asha's life. The staff remained gathered in the hall, the silence now thick with anticipation rather than suspicion. Asha stood apart, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her mind a blank slate of prayer and hope. She felt as though her entire future was being weighed in the balance. Finally, the assistant returned, holding a small tablet. He spoke quietly to Mrs. Day, who listened without a change in her stoic expression. The truth, captured in silent, digital clarity, had emerged. The footage clearly showed Rena herself, not Asha, entering her own room, taking the ruby necklace from its box, and carefully hiding it deep within her own leather handbag before creating the commotion. When confronted with the undeniable proof, Rena crumbled completely. All her bluster and arrogance evaporated, leaving behind a pathetic, stammering girl. "It was just a joke," she cried, tears of humiliation now streaming down her face. "I was just testing her. I didn't mean any harm." But the excuse was flimsy and transparent, and the damage was already done. The malicious intent behind her actions was laid bare for all to see. The silence in the room was now one of judgment. Mrs. Day's face remained unreadable, a mask of cold composure, but her eyes held a deep and profound disappointment as she looked at her niece. Then she turned her attention back to Asha, who had watched the entire revelation with a quiet, somber dignity. Mrs. Day walked over to Asha, stopping directly in front of her. The apology, when it came, was simple and sincere. "I am sorry, Asha," she said, her voice softer now. "You did not deserve to be put through that." Asha simply bowed her head in acknowledgement. "Thank you for believing in me, madam," she whispered, her voice thick with relief. Mrs. Day's response was surprisingly candid. "I didn't," she admitted, "not fully. A part of me doubted you, but I hoped that I would be proven wrong to have that doubt." And I was. That night, Mrs. Day gathered the entire staff and made a quiet announcement. "From this day forward, Asha will oversee all household accounts and staff coordination. She has earned my complete and total trust." Asha's throat tightened with emotion as the other servants, including the stern butler, began to clap gently, their applause a warm wave of respect and acceptance. She had faced the fire and had not been broken. Instead, she had emerged stronger, her light shining brighter than ever before. The days that followed the false accusation were brighter and filled with a newfound sense of purpose for Asha. Her promotion to oversee household accounts and coordinate the staff was not just a change in title, it was a profound affirmation of her character. She carried her new responsibilities with a quiet and unassuming grace. There was no trace of pride in her demeanor, only the steady, unshakable confidence of someone who had earned her place through unwavering honesty. Under her careful and considerate management, the household began to run with an even smoother efficiency. She treated every member of the staff with respect, listening to their concerns and ensuring fairness, which in turn fostered a harmonious and loyal atmosphere within the grand home. True to her word, Mrs. Day continued to ensure that Amma received the best possible medical care at the town clinic. The weekly visits and consistent medication worked wonders. Amma's persistent rattling cough softened into a rare, gentle clearing of her throat, and her voice, once frail and wispy, grew stronger and steadier with each passing week. Raju too thrived in his new environment. Enrolled in a proper school with new books, sturdy shoes and a smart uniform, he blossomed. His natural curiosity was nurtured and he excelled in his studies. One afternoon he came running home, his face alight with pure joy, waving his excellent report card like a victory flag. Watching him from behind the curtain, Asha felt tears of quiet happiness stream down her face. One beautiful Sunday morning, Asha decided to return to her village, her heart full and a woven basket resting on her hip. She walked the familiar dusty path, but this time she walked not as a desperate girl, but as a confident young woman with a clear purpose in her step. She went straight to the old pottery shed where she found Babuji at his wheel, his hands moving with the innate memory and deep care of a lifetime dedicated to his craft. He was shaping a large water jug, his focus intense. As she entered the quiet, sun-dappled shed, he looked up and a wide, warm smile spread across his wrinkled face. "Well, well," he said, his voice filled with a deep, rumbling affection that warmed Asha's soul. "If it isn't my very best student returned from the big town." Asha smiled and knelt beside him on the cool, clay-dusted floor. She opened her basket and carefully took out a small, simple clay lamp. It was the very first piece she had ever successfully created, crude and a little lopsided, but now it was cleaned, delicately painted with a simple floral design, and mounted on a small polished wooden base. "I kept this, Babuji," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I wanted to keep it to always remind me of where I came from." Babuji's eyes misted over as he reached out a clay-stained hand to touch it gently. "And just look how far you have come, my child." They sat together for a long while in a comfortable, easy silence, the only sounds being the gentle crackling of the fire in the kiln and the distant calls of birds. It was a moment of connection that needed no words, a shared understanding of the journey she had undertaken. Back in the town, Asha's sense of purpose continued to expand beyond the walls of the Day household. She began a new project, one born from her own experiences. In the evenings, after her work was done, she started teaching a small group of neighborhood children. Most of them were like she had once been, children who worked as housemaids, delivery boys, or ran errands during the day with no opportunity for a formal education. She gathered them in the quiet courtyard behind the Day house, and with patience and kindness, she taught them their letters and numbers. But more importantly, she taught them through stories. She shared tales of courage, of kindness, and of the profound importance of the choices one makes. She told them her own story in a way, speaking of how even a simple lump of clay, if shaped with care and integrity, and passed through the fires of hardship, could be transformed into a vessel that holds light for the world. The children listened with wide, captivated eyes, their young faces illuminated by the single lantern she lit for their lessons, absorbing lessons that went far beyond basic literacy. One evening, Mrs. Day stood on her grand veranda, watching the scene unfold in the courtyard below. The setting sun bathed the small gathering in a soft, golden light, casting long shadows. Asha sat in the center of a circle of eager children, her expression gentle and encouraging, her voice a calm and steady presence. A quiet smile touched Mrs. Day's lips, not her usual guarded smile, but one filled with a genuine warmth and a touch of unmistakable pride. She was witnessing the ripple effect of a single act of goodness, seeing how the light she had recognized in Asha was now being shared, illuminating other young lives and planting seeds of hope in the most unlikely of gardens. Asha never became wealthy in the way the world measures riches, with acres of land or coffers of gold. Her wealth was of a different, more enduring kind. She became something far rarer and more precious, a person who was deeply respected, completely trusted, and genuinely loved by all who knew her. Her story spread quietly through the town and back to her village. Not because she ever spoke of her own virtues, but because others did. They spoke of the poor village girl who could have taken a fortune but chose to give it back instead. They told the story of the young woman who rose not through shortcuts or deceit, but with honesty as her cleansing fire and kindness as her shaping hand. So in the hearts of all who knew her, she remained what her name had always promised she would be, Asha, a radiant and unwavering hope. Asha's journey was not a grand epic written in the annals of history, but a quiet, powerful poem composed in the humble language of everyday choices. Her story began in the dust of a sunbaked village, amidst the familiar struggles of poverty and the gnawing ache of uncertainty. Yet from this very earth she molded a life of extraordinary integrity. She understood in a way that many never do that true wealth is not measured by what one can accumulate, but by what one is willing to give up to preserve one's character. Her path was illuminated not by a sudden stroke of luck, but by the steady internal flame of her own principles, a light she refused to let the shadows of desperation extinguish. The world often rewards the loud and the cunning, celebrating those who take the shortest path to success, regardless of the moral compromises made along the way. Asha's story, however, serves as a gentle but profound counter-narrative. It reminds us that there is a quiet strength in humility, a deep power in honesty, and an enduring grace in kindness. Her rise was not meteoric, it was a slow, steady ascent, built brick by brick with each right decision, each act of compassion, and each moment she chose integrity over personal gain. She proved that a foundation of goodness, though it may seem modest, can support the weight of the grandest legacy. She did not set out to change the world, only to honor the values her mother had instilled in her. Yet in doing so, she created ripples of change that touched everyone she met. For Babuji, she was the continuation of a legacy. For Mrs. Day, she was a restoration of faith in humanity. For the children she taught, she was a living example that their circumstances did not have to define their future. Asha became a beacon, not because she sought the spotlight, but because her inner light was so pure that it could not be contained. It shone through her actions, warming those around her and illuminating a path for others to follow. In the end, Asha's story is a testament to the enduring power of hope. Not the passive, wishful kind, but the active, resilient hope that is forged in the kiln of hardship. It is the hope that believes in the goodness of one's own heart, even when the world offers reasons to be cynical. It is the light found within the simplest clay, a reminder that character, like a well-made pot, is shaped by steady hands, hardened by fire, and ultimately created to hold and share the light. Her name meant hope, and through her life she gave that hope meaning, transforming it from a simple word into a living, breathing inspiration for all.